Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome back to Growers Daily. It is Tuesday, October 1st, 2024, and on today's show, we're going to talk about some common garden pests. We're going to break down what this show actually is, which being the second episode, that seems appropriate. Later in the episode, I take issue with a comment I saw yesterday, and we're going to hear from a North Carolina farmer about their experience with Hurricane Helene and what they are witnessing right now, and it's wild. So, let's do it. All right, so let's start the show with, the show. What is Growers Daily? Right now, Growers Daily is a 20-ish minute show that will come up every weekday from now until the end of time. And by the end of time, I guess that I mean whenever I decide to retire or when it becomes just entirely too hard to do this. The idea really started a couple of summers ago when I realized that the first podcasts I personally listen to every day, and I listen to a lot of podcasts, were the podcasts that, and forgive me if this sounds incredibly obvious, but they were the podcasts that uploaded every single day and didn't have anything to do with farming. For instance, I listened to The Daily from the New York Times every morning. And then in the afternoon, I listened to Kentucky Sports Radio. But it's that second one, the sports talk radio show, primarily focused on the University of Kentucky sports, that really got my wheels turning because it occurred to me that out of all the podcasts we've started, from the Composter to the Seed Farmer podcast to Winter Growers to the Collaborative Farming podcast and beyond, one type that we'd never really attempted was a sports-style daily show. Something more casual, something to balance out the technical details of our other shows, but that wasn't afraid to occasionally get technical itself, or conversely, avoid getting technical at times like in the middle of the summer when we all kind of just need a break from thinking too much about farming. So to that question of what is Growers Daily, that's it. In its current iteration, it's simply a daily show hosted by me, and Growers Daily will go up every afternoon on both our YouTube channel and on the No-Till Growers Network feed, where you are probably listening to this right now, because I don't know where else you'd be listening to it. But in terms of format and content, who knows what this thing will grow into? You all, and especially our Patreon members, are going to have a large say in what Growers Daily becomes. You ready to hear my sort of long-term vision for it? Well, one thing that will have to happen is that I will have to hire a producer eventually. At this moment, the show is it's all me. And at some point, that's going to be a little too bananas, even for someone whose life philosophy is, if you want something done, give it to a busy person, which I'm not entirely sure was intended to be a life philosophy, but here we are. That means at some point, when the Patreon and ad revenue grows enough to pay someone else, we will be searching for our first co-host/producer to help me out, which is exciting. We will improve the video side, maybe add a couple different angles and more additional clips. I'd like to make the show longer. I personally like an hour or 2 hour long shows. I can't do that on my own. Each of these shows takes like 8 or 9 hours minimum to produce. And again, it would be nice to have another person for you to look at, to listen to learn from. So the first part of the vision is that the show will have a much more conversational feel, where a co-host or two and I can dig into farming and non-farming related topics. The farming related topics will be the obvious stuff: how to grow things being the technical term, how to run a farm business, how to not die of exhaustion, the farm stuff. And the show will focus on answering listener questions a lot. Obviously, yesterday and a bit today, I have covered the flooding from Hurricane Helene a bit, which I also want covering these sorts of events or disasters to be a part of the show. We learn a lot from this sort of stuff. As for the non-farming related things, pretty much anything is on the table there, though I'm not really going to dive into politics here beyond how they relate to farming. This show simply wants to hang out with you while you work, while you exercise, or change the world, or change a diaper, which is equally as heroic. I'm also a soccer coach and a soccer nerd, so I probably will talk soccer and coaching, because there is a weird amount of overlap between running a business and coaching, and also I don't have anywhere else to talk about those things. So, look out for some of my soccer analogies to be a little bit of a stretch, and you'll love it. Also, I mentioned listener questions, and I think that another cool goal, see, there's the soccer reference. Anyway, another cool goal for this show would be to have a call-in segment where listeners can call in and we can take questions directly from you for the show. Again, though, it's going to be a slog getting to that point. This thing will have to grow quite a bit before we can get to doing things like that revenue-wise. But right now, what you are listening to, and plus what you heard yesterday, is kind of the seed, to abuse a common farming metaphor. And we get to sprout and shape and prune and nurture this thing together into something cool. I will take a lot of your input, especially the Patreon members. Oh, and if you're listening right now to this podcast, know that it is also available on YouTube, where I will add a small amount of photos and videos when possible, so it's not just me talking. Indeed, if you are watching it on YouTube, know that the goal will be to make this a much more interesting experience visually as the support grows through things like the Patreon page, donations from Super Thanks, and all that good stuff. So if you like it, but wouldn't mind it being a little bit more visually interesting, consider kicking in a few bucks so I can get a producer. I know for me, how I utilize the daily shows in my life is largely for motivation. When I get started in the morning, I put on the daily from the New York Times and then get to work. I mean, it's not always the most uplifting way to start the day, but maybe there is something to the idea that all the chaos in the world inspires me to work on the soil and the land a little bit more. Or maybe I'm just a bit of an informational masochist and can't help myself. But anyway, I listen to that first thing when I get started in the morning, and then the rest of the morning I dig into my weekly podcasts that have uploaded that day or earlier in the week. And we will talk about some of my other favorite podcasts at some point, and I would love to hear what your favorite podcasts are at some point. Beyond the daily shows I listen to, they're mostly the No-Till Growers podcast family, or they're soccer related. But yeah, we'll talk about podcasts and maybe other stuff I listen to, like Sabrina Carpenter's Slim Pickens on repeat. For real though, that song is amazing. Anyway, I usually work until noonish, take my lunch break, take my power nap, which shout out to whoever invented naps. Love your work. And then when I wake up, it's often, pretty hot outside and I have no interest in really getting back out there very quickly, or I'm beat from the morning. But I see that Kentucky Sports Radio has uploaded. They uploaded around noon every day, and that's usually what gets me pumped for the second half of my farm day. I turn that show on and start my afternoon work, listening to a few goofy dudes discuss a wide range of stuff involving the University of Kentucky and other collegiate sports or professional sports, and sometimes nothing to do with sports at all. In fact, that's kind of what happened to me yesterday. Got the first episode done and uploaded, ate my lunch, took my nap, saw that they'd uploaded the latest Kentucky Sports Radio conversation, and I was like, rad, let's go clear out a cat tunnel. And so that's what I did. So if you're wondering why these upload at 1:30 p.m. Eastern, not only do I do them every day in the morning, I want them to be there for you in the afternoons, at least here in the US in the afternoons. Your caterpillar tunnels will thank you for this show, in theory. Now, this show will not be like either of those shows that I just mentioned pretty much at all, but I do hope it will serve a similar purpose for you that those shows serve for me. It'll be consistent, it'll be fun and entertaining and occasionally technical, and hopefully you will enjoy it because I think farmers can use a daily show of our own, not only as entertainment, but information on growing, for perspective, for soccer references, because if I know farmers, which sometimes is the case, we have a lot of podcast listening time. And I think for now, at least, that kind of does it. That is what this show is going to be. Next, I'm going to take a quick break, and then we'll get to a question from our Patreon members in the next segment. BRB. Today's episode is brought to you by Rimmel Greenhouses.
Whether it's tomatoes to market, flowers in the spring, or your family's harvest, growing in a greenhouse protected from the weather provides the right environment that you need for a harvest that you can count on. Rimmel greenhouses are designed for durability and offer the quality that you need to grow productively year-round. Visit rimmelgreenhouses.com to get a quote today.
If I may editorialize for a second, I own a Rimmel tunnel. I love it. We built it ourselves, and I really appreciated the quality of the tunnel as well as the customer service we received in the process, so make sure to check them out. All right, so in every episode, I will try to get to a listener question from our Patreon supporters over at patreon.com/no-till-growers. Like I said, if you have a question that you would love to hear answered on the show, go to patreon.com/no-till-growers and sign up to support Growers Daily and all of our work. I will try to get to questions from every place questions can be gotten, if that's in fact a verb tense, but I will always get to those Patreon comments. You all just absolutely rock. All right, Patreon member Scott Williamson says that he no-till farms a quarter acre and his garden pests include whiteflies, gophers, and slugs, and asks, what can I use to get rid of them organically? Thank you for your help. Well, obviously nothing is going to treat all three, really. I mean, not anything that would leave you with a farm left after using it, at least. For gophers, which I should note are not an issue here in Kentucky, but we have things like tornadoes and floods and deer and humidity and stuff, so don't get too envious. But for gophers, you have a few options. Burying gopher fence can help. When I visited my friends at Ojai Roots in Southern California this past April, they showed me some black gopher wire fencing that they are burying around their fruit trees and gardens at I think like 2 to 3 feet deep, if I remember correctly. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see what that looks like a little bit. That's pretty intense and expensive on a large scale, but on a small scale could be helpful. Also, gopher traps like the gopher hawk do seem to help based on the conversations I've had with growers. Habitat for hawks and such might also be helpful as well as potentially cats, but also Dachshunds or terrier dogs could be of assistance. So I guess money, time, and pets is kind of the answer for gophers. The big problem there, as I see it, is that gophers like what gardens offer, tender plants and roots, but also potentially insects, worms, etc., as they are opportunistic omnivores, although they are technically herbivores. It's like a deer here in the drought. Our deer pressure is low in a wet season when they have a lot to eat out in the wild, but in a drought, they fixate on our gardens because that is where the moisture is, and effectively the moisture-rich plants. For gophers, it's the same thing. They are hard on gardens in dry climates because that's where the goodies are. Perhaps that's a little obvious and may not be helpful to controlling them, but maybe that perspective is helpful to those who have the water and land to potentially create alternative areas to their gardens for gophers to do their thing elsewhere. As for slugs, if it's an acute problem, you could consider Sluggo. It's an approved organic product, although I've never used it. I've heard it is effective. I like beer traps for myself for slugs if the issue is confined to a small area. Place a cup of beer inside of a live trap that's closed so no big critters can get into it and party in your garden. Anyway, place that near where the issue is overnight and you will find loads of dead, drunk slugs in the morning, which is a delicacy in some countries. Kidding. Probably. For whiteflies, which whiteflies suck, sorry that you have them, but for whiteflies, make sure there is plenty of diverse flowering habitat for beneficials because whiteflies have a lot of predators like lacewings and some lady beetles. You can also purchase and release those sorts of things like lacewings and lady beetles, though that comes with other complications that we'll get into another time. Remove infected leaves as soon as you see the issue developing. Neem oil and pyrethrin are also potential organic options for treating outbreaks. My general advice, however, when you have to treat an acute issue with something like that, like a spray of some sort, is to spray 2 positive things like a compost tea or extract or nutrient solution for every negative pest killing treatment you use. So 2 positives for every negative. And I just say negative, meaning like its intention is not to build life, but to remove it. Negative. Exclusionary pest netting or insect netting, I believe, can help, but that's not as helpful later in the plant's life because if it is, say, tomatoes, then you need pollinators to be able to access those flowers. But perhaps some insect netting will allow you to get them established, to get the plants established. Diversity and improving soil health will always help, but I find nothing less helpful than when people say, fix your soil and it will fix your pest issues or disease issues. And that's because, well, one, I mean, gophers don't care. And 2, quote unquote, fixing your soil is incredibly contextual and can take many years in some contexts. I've had soils that I fixed, so to speak, in a few months, while certain parts of my current land where the clay is thick and old and compacted, frankly, feel like they don't want anything to do with being fixed. They're just stubborn things. When I get old and deplete, I will probably be the same way, so at least they have my respect. That's the vibe those plots are giving me, sort of the, clay is the ornery old fart of soil types. Yeah, that's right. Anyway, I hope that's at least somewhat helpful, Scott. There is no easy answer to pest management. It's usually multiple layers of things that you have to do or need to do differently. However, if you have other things that have worked for you on slugs, whiteflies, and or gophers, listener, let us know in the comments or at the forum. We'll take one more quick break, and when we come back, we're going to hear from one of the farmers affected by Hurricane Helene. Be right back. So our work has always been about keeping farming information as free and open to the public as we possibly can, and that won't change. One way in which we make that possible, though, is through advertising on podcasts like this, on our YouTube channel, on our forum. and so on. So if you are a small farm-related company selling seeds or tools or something growers could use, or if you're an organization putting on some conference or offering a grant or looking for farmer contributors or something else farm-related that I'm not thinking of, get in touch with us at Farmer Michelle at no-tillgrowers.com. That's Farmer Michelle at no-tillgrowers.com. Supporting us helps to grow this work and grow farmers. So we all thank you. Again, that email is farmermichelle at no-tillgrowers.com, or you can find our contact information at no-tillgrowers.com. All right. Thanks, y'all. Enjoy the show. Okay, so this weekend I sent a message to our friends Lyric and Noah at Wild East Farm in Western North Carolina. First, I was just kind of checking in to make sure that they were okay, but I also asked if they would be willing to chat with me for a few minutes and share their story. Then late yesterday afternoon, I got the message from Lyric that said, I am in service now for the next 30 minutes if you want to call. And so I grabbed my phone and computer and ran outside where I get cell reception better to give Lyric a call so I didn't miss her before she went out of service again. Now, the audio is surprisingly not the worst, considering the only thing I could come up with on the fly was recording my phone on speaker on QuickTime. But there is no video, so I'll show a few pictures during our conversation that they shared, and then I'll rejoin in about 10 or 12 minutes to kind of talk about it and wrap up. So, all right, here's that conversation and a little glimpse inside what it was like to be in the hurricane and what it is like in that region right now with Lyric of Wild East Farm.
There was 20 feet of flooding in other areas and entire communities are gone. So we are not in that position. Just to state that clearly, it was still scary, certainly on the farm. The winds and the flooding were more than we expected. Trees were just snapping and falling all around. We lost probably hundreds of trees in our woods, but luckily none of the trees damaged permanent infrastructure. We did lose 2 of our caterpillar tunnels and watch that happen, which was a little bit scary. And then the most labor intensive and most unexpected part for us was the flooding from our creek came up higher into our pasture than we expected. And so we did have animals in what became the flood zone. And so we were, out there in the water, rescuing drowning turkeys. It was pretty intense. Luckily, it got to a point where, we were assessing the water, and if it had risen any higher, we would have lost thousands of animals. We had almost 2,000 animals on the farm at the time, but basically it got to a point and began receding basically at the critical moment for us. So that was deeply relieving to see. Our sheep and pigs weathered the storm. They're unaffected, though there was flooding in the pig paddock. We lost about 30 birds overall since we were out there actively swimming and saving them. Just hypothermia and drowning did kill some. And then overall, our gardens were relatively unaffected. We spent hours and hours and hours of labor trenching before the storm.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So we set up we've been working towards having a more resilient system to rainwater infiltration. And so there's been work over the last few months and then a lot of work leading up to the storm. And so the floods did not reach the gardens. And so it was just the rainwater coming in to the gardens. And that moved honestly beautifully through our trench system. We had a couple beds wash out. Some crops are too saturated and won't make it. But overall, the vegetables survived, and the water receded quick enough that our tree crops survived as well. Some of them were under, 2 or 3 feet of water, but it resolved in a matter of hours. So we're okay overall. We have no power or internet, or we have some solar power, but it's very bare bones. But there's no grid power in most, if not all, of Western North Carolina right now. Most people have no phone service, no internet. We're lucky to have water because we can power our well pump on our solar. But yeah, there's just total blackout basically. Gas is short everywhere, and most roads are still closed. So in and out of Asheville is very challenging. And there's still people missing. I mean, it's a very, very serious situation.
Yeah, I mean, my heart breaks for everybody out there. I think those sort of situations, you see them on the news, like from afar, and
Totally.
and it's easy to just be like, oh, it's like another flood. But to be in that experience, and I talked about this yesterday on the podcast, just like the idea that you don't think you're going to be in a flood, and then it just suddenly happens, and it just keeps happening, and then keeps coming, and you keep having to make like decisions as it comes up, as the water rises. What was that like for you when that was going on? What was that like?
Yeah, there were kind of a few chapters, looking back at it, where it was windy and it was raining and it was intense, and we all stayed inside and kept just doing every 30 minutes walk around and do a periodic check, and okay, things are really saturated, okay, the turkeys are very saturated, okay, there's water in the pig paddock, and it kind of just started to escalate a bit. And then we were up at the house and we saw the creek rise into the pasture, and so that's when we basically remained outside, at least two of us out there in it, and watching the water rise. We were running through all the different options of evacuating animals, and there just was no option. So that's when it got pretty scary. Like I was saying, it got to a point where it's like, okay, if it's any worse, the animals die, because there was just no way to get them out of the field. But luckily it didn't get to that point. So there was definitely some moments of fear and desperation, and potential for heavier loss, but luckily that didn't happen. And so we were able to not dwell or be pulled into that state of panic too much. But the only decision really to make was like get in the water and get the turkeys out. There's just no choice. You can't, I can't watch my animals drown. So that was the only choice that felt like, wow, I'm potentially risking my health. I don't know what was in the water, but it made our skin burn really bad. Like, that's a really weird part of it. It was definitely contaminated. And so that was really hard to just, kind of, it was a moment of like, what's going on? I'm so wet and I'm burning. But again, compared to people losing their homes and lives, it doesn't even compare. But I think we have a really strong decision-making framework on the farm, and a strong ability to remain calm and communicate in disaster situations, as proven by this, and as proven of how we've navigated the aftermath. But I think the decisions made themselves really clear, just because we were basically dealing with save the animals or don't. There wasn't anything to do. You can't take down your caterpillar tunnels in a hurricane. Everything else was just like, okay, if it gets gone, it gets gone. But the only decisions I think we were making in the moment was like, how do we get these animals out? Makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate talking about, just mentioning that, the decision-making framework, because I think that is a really important part of it. So how are you getting updates from like the, North Carolina state, local, is that just through their website? Are they contacting you, or what's that side of the communication look like?
So I'm driving to phone service multiple times a day at this point. I'm very involved in community organizing in Asheville. I run one of the farmers markets in Asheville, so I'm basically jumped into like food access mobilization mode. So I'm driving to service multiple times a day to try to coordinate efforts for our vendors and people affected by the storm to get them food. So I'm driving about 20 minutes one way to sit in this parking lot to get phone service. And then the emergency alerts come through when I get to service. So the most updated alerts that we've received are that the National Guard has been deployed, and that non-emergency travel is prohibited, and that our town and several towns nearby are out of municipal water, because water plants have flooded. So those are the most recent federal or state governmental updates that we've received. And then when I get to this spot at the gas station, I do have access to the internet, and so I'm just scrolling and checking and seeing where other parts of the state are in. But basically, the only other thing I'll say is that since there's broad spread no cell phone service, the relief efforts are like slow to come online because it's really challenging to coordinate right now. But one effort I do know of specific to farmers, the Appalachian Sustainable Agriculture Project is the leading organization, the leading nonprofit organization to support farmers in Western North Carolina, as well as some parts of Virginia and South Carolina. And so they're coordinating donations to build a disaster relief fund to distribute directly to farmers. So if people are looking for a way to support farmers in the area, donating to the Appalachian Sustainable Agriculture Project is a great place to start for now.
I won't keep you any longer, Lyric. I really appreciate you taking a few minutes to chat with us and keep us updated. And wishing you and everyone there the best. It's just heartbreaking, and we hope for a quick and fast recovery. It's absolutely heartbreaking to watch.
For sure. Thanks, Jesse. Thanks for being on, trying to share the story.
All right. Oof. I mean, what a scary and an intense event. And I'm so thankful they were able to make it through that okay. And the animals were largely okay. Huge thank you to Lyric for taking the time to update us. I know that she's super busy and very stressed. And this event honestly sounds like it'll be going on for several months. I love these farmers, and at some point we will dive into a little bit more about what they were talking about with the decision-making framework stuff, because it is that sort of stuff that really makes this farm brilliant and one of my favorite farms to watch, but also could really help a lot of people have a good plan for these sorts of situations, or just have a good way of managing kind of unknown things, because sometimes the water doesn't seem like it's going to crest over the top, and then it does, and you kind of have to know what to do. Anyway, we got to visit Wild East Farm back in March for the Organic Growers School Conference in North Carolina, and did a video with them that you can watch on our YouTube channel. We also got a chance to host a roundtable at that conference, at the OGS conference, with Lyric and Noah of Wild East Farm and Aaron of Cedar Chest Farm, where we discuss scaling up from homestead to farm business. Both of those things I will link in the show notes. Speaking of Organic Growers School, Chris Peterson, who is the conference coordinator there at OGS, is keeping a list of farms affected and who can potentially use some help. Wild East has said they got what they needed, so they're all good on the financial side, thankfully. But if you can help one of these other farms and you're interested, here's a quick list of other farms from Chris to look to: Green Toe Farm, Bluebird Farm, Tiny Bridge Farm, Earth Haven, Beacon Village Farm, Tinwell, and Small Holding Farm. I will link those in the show notes so you don't have to stop and write all those down. Again, our thoughts and hearts are with all those affected by Helene. Chip in or pitch in if you can, and be on the lookout for ways to help. Okay, I have one more thing I want to get to before we jet. Some thoughts on a comment I saw about yesterday's episode. Okay, I just saw someone mention in the comments yesterday that could I please add sections to the video so they could skip the stuff not relevant to them outside of the US? And I'm assuming they're talking about the hurricane stuff. First, I'm fine with adding sections. Commenters can do that, and YouTube eventually does it for you. Once this thing grows and I have help, totally fine with that. Maybe my producer can help me do those things. But as for relevance, yes, this is a hurricane that hit the US, but that doesn't make it irrelevant to someone outside of the US. Disasters can and do happen anywhere and everywhere, and they will continue to, perhaps increasingly so. Covering them is how we learn to prepare ourselves, or learn what to do in the off chance that it is us in that terrifying, catastrophic situation. Moreover, hearing from folks like Lyric makes all those pictures we see on the news much more real, and gives them a voice that you, as a grower, can relate to, no matter where you are. I recognize myself in Lyric in the way, especially in the way that she said it was scary. Being in a flood is scary in a way that the other things are not scary. But being prepared is how you get through it. You don't have to like or watch or listen to everything I publish, not at all. But I want you to try to avoid to think of a disaster in another country or climate as irrelevant to you, because it could one day be relevant. So I hope you will be open-minded and learn what you can. I learn something from every farmer I listen to, no matter where they are in the world, and we will cover international events when they make sense for that reason. So yeah, just keep that in mind. All right, that wraps up October 1st. If you want to support this work and you like this show and want to see it grow, That was entirely unintended. My bad. I make bad jokes, but one thing I don't do is try to rhyme. Yet. Anyway, you can join us at patreon.com/no-till-growers. You can pick up a copy of the Living Soil Handbook or a hat or other merch at no-till-growers.com. Speaking of Patreon members, I have some shout outs to get to from all of the new folks who joined over the summer. And again, everyone who joins in the month of October will get a shout out in the show, including those who joined yesterday because you're awesome. Or if you just bump up from one level to another, shout outs for that too. So quick shout outs to the Patreon members who help make this possible: Freetown Food Forest, Zach Hardy, Mullins Hill Farm, Tawny, Dorkasaur. Dorkasaur, that's a good, that's what we were going to call our firstborn. Rebecca, Jason Broughton, Ryan Martinson, Bill Marshall, JP, Tiffany Sanders, Joan Atkinson, Michael Bozarth, Rochelle McLeish, Colm Laughlin McCool. McCool. I mean, I'm not gonna say it's not real, because it totally could be real. And if it's real, it's like the best last name ever. Thanks for watching Growers Daily. Like, share, and subscribe. We'll see you tomorrow.